Imagine yourself stepping into a bustling marketplace thousands of years ago. The air is thick with the aroma of spices, roasting bread, and the earthy scent of animals being traded nearby. The sounds of merchants calling out their goods, of coins clinking in exchange, and of people haggling in dozens of voices blend into a constant hum that surrounds you. Everywhere you look, stalls are overflowing with colorful fabrics, fresh produce, jars of oil, fine pottery, and items brought from distant lands. But shopping in an ancient marketplace was nothing like walking into a store today. There were no price tags, no neat aisles, and no guarantees that the merchant was telling you the full truth about their wares. To survive and succeed in such a place, you needed sharp eyes, quick wits, and a willingness to haggle for everything you wanted. The marketplace wasn't just where you bought food, it was the heartbeat of the community, where news traveled faster than any messenger, where deals were struck, and where fortunes could be won or lost. Tonight, as you listen, let yourself wander back into those busy, crowded avenues of trade. Picture yourself weaving through merchants of every kind, hearing the stories of where their goods came from, and discovering just how central the market was to ancient life. This is not just history. It's an immersive journey designed to help you relax, settle in, and gently drift toward sleep as you imagine the rhythm of life long ago. Before we begin, I'd like to invite you to subscribe to this channel, History for Sleep. Subscribing helps you join our community of listeners who love to unwind with history, and it ensures you won't miss the next story we share. I'd also love for you to leave a comment. Tell us what part of history fascinates you most, or simply let us know when you usually listen in. At bedtime, during a nap, or whenever you need a calming voice to carry you into rest. Your comments not only help us know what stories to tell next, but they also bring our community together. So now, take a deep breath, get comfortable, and prepare to step into the lively, colorful, and sometimes chaotic world of the ancient marketplace. Let the story unfold, let the details paint themselves in your imagination, and let the soothing rhythm of history carry you toward peace. When you first imagine an ancient marketplace, it may be tempting to think of it as a distant ancestor of the modern supermarket, but the reality was far more complex, vibrant, and overwhelming. To step into one was to immerse yourself in a sensory storm that hit you the moment you entered its crowded paths. Picture yourself walking through the arched entryway of a bustling bazaar, or stepping onto the dusty open square of a village market. The first sensation is always the smell. Spices from faraway lands, cinnamon, cloves, pepper, and saffron rose in invisible clouds, mixing with the sharper tang of freshly butchered meat, the sweet scent of honey, the smoke of open cooking fires, and the earthy weight of animals that were tethered or herded nearby. It was never a single smell, but a shifting tide that would follow you with every step you took. The soundscape was just as overwhelming. Dozens of voices layered over each other like music, each one straining to be heard above the rest. Merchants cried out the virtues of their goods, exaggerating the freshness of their fruits or the rarity of their fabrics. Customers responded with skepticism, offering lower prices, laughing at the boldness of the sellers, or pretending to walk away to gain the upper hand in a bargain. Children darted between stalls, chasing one another or carrying small baskets for their parents. Beggars sang out their need, hoping that the generosity of the crowd would spare a few coins. Somewhere, a street performer strummed a stringed instrument or balanced a clay jar on his head to draw the eyes of those passing by. This constant hum of voices, laughter, bargaining, and music created a living rhythm that seemed to pulse with the market itself. Your eyes, too, were never at rest. Everywhere you looked, color leapt out at you. Piles of oranges and pomegranates glistened under the sun, their bright skins stacked in careful pyramids. Rolls of dyed cloth shimmered in deep reds, rich blues, and golden yellows, sometimes draped over poles, so they caught the breeze and shimmered as though alive. Jewelry makers laid out trays of beads and bangles, some of glass, some of copper, and the rare few of silver or gold. For those with coin to spare, there were treasures from faraway lands, incense from Arabia, fine oils from Egypt, tin from distant mines, and silk carried across continents by caravans who had crossed mountains and deserts. But the ancient marketplace was not just a place for buying goods. It was a place of human connection, of exchange far deeper than coins for items. For villagers and townspeople, this was the gathering place where neighbors met to share news, where rumors spread faster than any official announcement, and where the affairs of the world seemed to filter into the lives of ordinary people. A merchant might tell you of wars being fought in distant lands as he sold you olive oil, or a traveler might exchange tales of strange customs while offering trinkets from abroad. The market was the closest thing many people had to a newspaper or a town hall, a place where the currents of society swirled together in one living, breathing mass. Of course, navigating such a place was no easy task. There were no neat lines of stalls, no orderly maps of where to find what you needed. Stalls might be built of wood, stone, or simply cloth stretched over poles, scattered haphazardly through open squares, along narrow alleys, or even spilling outside the city gates. Animals jostled for space with people, and carts piled high with goods blocked narrow paths. The noise was constant, the crowd thick, and the air heavy with the heat of bodies pressed together. If you were new to the market, you might find yourself quickly overwhelmed. But for those who came week after week, the chaos was a kind of order in itself, familiar and even comforting, a rhythm they could navigate with ease. Haggling was the soul of the marketplace. Nothing had a fixed price, and every purchase was a kind of dance between buyer and seller. A merchant might begin by naming a price 3 times higher than what he truly expected, waiting for your reaction. You, as the buyer, would scoff, counter with an insultingly low offer, and the game would begin. Voices would rise, gestures would grow wide, and sometimes laughter would cut through the seriousness of it all. It was never just about the price. It was about the performance, the pride of each side to prove they could win the battle of words. To haggle well was considered a skill, one that marked you as clever and experienced. To haggle poorly was to invite whispers about your foolishness. And always, hovering in the background, was the knowledge that neither side wanted to walk away with nothing. A seller needed to sell. A buyer needed to buy. In that tension lay the heartbeat of the trade. The goods themselves reflected not just daily needs, but also the cultural identity of the time. Bread, always a staple, was sold in many forms, from coarse loaves for the poor to fine, airy ones for the wealthy. Wine was measured out from large clay jars, each with its own flavor, depending on the vineyard or region. Meat, often salted or smoked to preserve it, was a luxury that drew eager buyers. But alongside the basics were luxuries that spoke of status. A finely crafted jug, a necklace of imported glass beads, or a rare spice could elevate a household's reputation and signal wealth or taste to others. Buying was not only about survival, but also about identity, about what your choices said to the world around you. The atmosphere of the marketplace was also tinged with danger. Pickpockets thrived in such crowds, slipping hands into purses when eyes were distracted. Merchants might try to cheat the unwary, weighing out less grain than promised or watering down their wine. Even the goods themselves might be counterfeit cheap dyes, passed off as rare ones, copper polished to look like bronze, or trinkets claimed to be treasures of distant lands when they were made just down the road. For this reason, experienced shoppers carried not only coins, but also a sharp mind, testing weights, tasting samples, and questioning every claim. The market was a stage for honesty and deception alike, and it was up to the buyer to tell the difference. Yet for all its noise, its chaos, its challenges, the marketplace was alive in a way few other places were. It was a crossroads of human life, where farmers, artisans, traders, and travelers came together, each one adding to the great tapestry of voices, smells, and colors. For many, the weekly market day was the highlight of their lives, a day to break the routine of work, to see friends, to gossip, and to feel a part of something greater. It was not only about goods exchanged, but about the community itself, about belonging to the rhythm of the crowd, the laughter, the bargaining, the spectacle of life unfolding in the open air. And so, to step into an ancient marketplace was to step into the heart of ancient society itself. Every sound, every smell, every bargain struck was a reminder that life was lived here in its most immediate form. The marketplace was not just where people shopped, it was where they lived a piece of their lives, surrounded by the hum of others, in a swirl of humanity that still echoes faintly across the centuries. As the sun began to rise, the ancient marketplace slowly came to life. In the cool air of the early morning, merchants arrived with carts and baskets, piled high with goods, some pulled by donkeys, or oxen, others carried on the shoulders of men who had walked for hours before dawn to claim a good spot. A clatter of wheels over cobblestones, the low grunts of animals, and the tired murmurs of merchants blended with the first cries of those setting up their stalls. You could smell the dew on the ground, the earthy scent of damp cloth being unfolded, and the sharp tang of wood smoke from small fires that vendors used to warm themselves before the crowds arrived. The marketplace was not born in an instant. It was built with every sound, every movement, as the city stirred awake. Merchants guarded their places jealously, for a prime location meant better sales. Those near the entrance or along the widest streets had an advantage, catching the eyes of customers before they grew weary of the noise and the haggling. Others had to settle for corners or alleys, relying on loyal customers who knew where to find them. Setting up was a ritual in itself. Tables were raised, cloth coverings stretched, goods displayed in ways meant to draw the gaze. A spice seller might open his jars, releasing scents that would float across the marketplace, luring customers as surely as a voice could. A potter might line his jugs and bowls in neat rows, the gleam of fresh glaze meant to catch the morning light. Farmers laid out their produce carefully, bright fruits and vegetables stacked in piles that suggested abundance and health. Every gesture, every placement of an object, was part of a silent competition with the stalls around it. As the first customers arrived, the energy shifted. Housewives carrying woven baskets appeared, intent on buying the day's necessities before the best goods were gone. They moved with purpose, their eyes sharp, scanning prices, weighing quality, and questioning every merchant's claim. Children trailed behind them, tugging at sleeves, begging for sweet cakes or small toys. Older men wandered in with slower steps, more interested in hearing the news or lingering in conversation than in rushing for food. Priests, scribes, or officials might pass through, their presence commanding a kind of hush, for their purchases carried prestige and might set the tone for others. For the merchants, the early morning was a crucial moment. They had to make sales quickly to secure profit, but they could not afford to let customers think they were desperate. To sell too cheaply early in the day was to invite lower offers later. To hold out for too high a price risked losing the first eager buyers. Every interaction was a balance, a performance of patience and persuasion. Some merchants called out boldly, praising their goods, their voices ringing across the square. Others waited in silence, letting the richness of their displays speak for themselves. The animals of the marketplace added another layer to the chaos. Chickens squawked from wicker cages. Goats bleated impatiently as their ropes tugged against posts, and the occasional cow let out a deep bellow that echoed across the stalls. Dogs wove through the legs of the crowd, sniffing for scraps or following their masters. For many, animals were not only food, but also trade themselves live creatures sold for work, milk, or breeding. The presence of animals made the market a place of constant motion, unpredictable and alive. By mid-morning, the marketplace was at its height. The narrow lanes between stalls grew crowded with bodies, elbows brushing against shoulders, the hum of voices rising into a roar. The air grew warmer, heavy with mingled scents. Bread baking in clay ovens, meat roasting on spits, fish laid out on beds of herbs, perfumes wafting from sellers who carried tiny vials of fragrant oils. Dust clung to your sandals, his feet stirred it up from the ground, and sometimes, if rain had fallen recently, the pathways turned into patches of slippery mud. It was not a place of comfort, it was a place of energy, of immediacy, where every sense was constantly stirred. A spectacle of the crowd was as important as the goods themselves. It was here that you saw the full cross-section of society. Wealthy households sent servants to make purchases, but often the masters themselves appeared to show off their status, inspecting luxury items with an air of detached superiority. Poorer families scraped together coins, stretching their budgets as far as possible, sometimes bargaining for the smallest portion of grain or oil. Travelers and foreigners stood out with their accents and clothing, offering exotic wares or searching for familiar foods from home. The market was not only about trade, but about visibility, about showing oneself in the heart of the city's life. Entertainment was woven into the day as naturally as trade. Musicians sat near busy intersections, playing stringed instruments or beating drums, their rhythms adding to the pulse of the crowd. Storytellers gathered listeners in small circles, spinning tales of heroes, gods, and distant wonders, their voices rising above the din whenever a particularly dramatic moment arrived. Jugglers, dancers, or acrobats performed for coins, their movements drawing cheers and claps, their presence reminding all that the market was also a place of joy, not just necessity. Even those with little to spend might linger for hours, drawn not by what they could buy, but by the life they could watch unfold. And always there was the undercurrent of risk. Crowds meant opportunity for thieves, who slipped through with practiced ease, lifting purses or snatching items when a buyer's eyes were fixed on a stall. Guards patrolled, but they could not be everywhere, and many victims discovered their losses too late. Fights broke out when tempers flared, an accusation of cheating, a shove in a crowded lane, a deal gone sour. In such moments, the noise shifted from cheerful chaos to sharp anger, voices raised, sometimes fists flying. Yet just as quickly as they flared, such incidents often dissolved back into the rhythm of the day, the market swallowing the conflict and moving on. By late afternoon, the energy began to change again. Merchants grew weary, their voices hoarse from hours of shouting. Goods grew scarce, the best long since taken, leaving behind what was less fresh or less desirable. Customers became more aggressive, hoping to drive prices lower as sellers sought to rid themselves of perishable stock before nightfall. This was the time for bargains, when clever buyers could walk away with armfuls of goods at a fraction of the morning price. The noise softened, though never fully quieted, as people began to drift away, baskets filled, errands completed. Finally, as the sun dipped low, the market began to close. Stalls were packed, animals loaded, and carts once more creaked over the streets. The square, so alive only hours earlier, fell into a tired stillness, the ground littered with stray leaves, broken pottery, and crumbs scattered by the crowd. What remained was the echo of voices, the lingering scent of spices, and the knowledge that tomorrow, or next week, the cycle would begin again. The marketplace was eternal in its rhythm, endlessly repeating, endlessly alive, a stage upon which the daily drama of life was played out again and again. To understand what it was like to shop in an ancient marketplace, it is important to imagine the people who made these spaces thrive, the merchants themselves. They were not a single type of person, but a tapestry of many different trades, personalities, and ambitions, each one adding something unique to the character of the market. Some were farmers who had risen before dawn to bring their produce into town, their carts loaded with cabbages, onions, beans, or grain, harvested only days earlier. Others were artisans, skilled in pottery, weaving, or metalwork, whose goods bore the mark of careful craftsmanship. Then there were the long-distance traders, men who had crossed deserts, rivers, and mountain passes to bring exotic items that carried with them the mystery of faraway lands. Each merchant stood as a living link between the ordinary shopper and a much wider world. The farmers were the most familiar faces to local buyers. They arrived dusty and tired, their clothes simple, their voices straightforward. Their stalls were filled with the essentials of life: grain to make bread, vegetables to feed families, fruit that would spoil quickly if not sold. For these sellers, the marketplace was less about grand profit and more about survival. They needed to turn their harvest into coin to buy the things they could not produce themselves, such as tools, salt, or cloth. They haggled, yes, but often with less performance than the professional traders. Their livelihood depended on steady sales, and their reputation in the community mattered deeply. To cheat a neighbor might win a single coin, but lose a dozen future customers. The artisans, by contrast, brought beauty and creativity into the marketplace. The potter's stalls gleamed with bowls, amphorae, and lamps, each one slightly unique in its form and decoration. Weavers displayed cloth in bold colors, dyed with natural pigments that sometimes came from distant lands. Leatherworkers set out sandals, belts, and bags, the scent of tanned hide strong in the air. Metalworkers showed tools, knives, and, for the wealthier buyers, jewelry that glinted in the sun. These artisans balanced necessity with artistry. A pot must hold water, but its painted design might carry meaning, charm, or pride for its owner. A tunic must protect from the weather, but its bright color could declare status. Shopping at these stalls was not only about function, but about expressing taste, identity, and sometimes even ambition. The long-distance traders were often the most fascinating figures. Their stalls carried not only goods, but also the aura of adventure. From Arabia came spices and incense, their scents sharp and exotic, unlike anything local fields could produce. From distant mines came tin, copper, and sometimes silver or gold, their metallic gleam promising wealth. From across the seas came glass beads, perfumes, fine oils, and even silk, shimmering like liquid in the light. These traders were often storytellers as well as sellers. They knew the power of mystery, and they wove tales of deserts crossed, seas sailed, and foreign kings whose courts glittered with treasures. Whether every word was true hardly mattered. The stories made the goods themselves feel richer, as though each item carried with it a slice of the world beyond the horizon. Not all merchants were men. Women, too, played vital roles in the marketplace, particularly in the selling of food, cloth, or small household items. A woman might bake bread at home and sell it fresh from her basket, or she might spin thread and offer skeins of wool to her neighbors. In some cultures, women dominated entire sections of the market, their voices loud and commanding, their reputations fierce. They haggled as sharply as any man, unwilling to let a single coin slip away without a fight. These women were not merely passive figures, but active participants in the economic lifeblood of their communities. Their skill at trade as respected as their skill at managing households. For every honest merchant, there were also those who thrived on deception. Some were skilled in tricks of measurement, using weights that looked solid, but were carved out inside to make them lighter. Others diluted wine with water or mixed cheap herbs into more expensive spices. Dyes might be faked with simple plants rather than rare minerals, and jewelry might be polished to appear more precious than it truly was. Shoppers had to remain wary, using their senses to detect fraud. They smelled the wine before buying, broke open nuts to test freshness, pressed cloth to judge its weave. Reputation mattered deeply in such a world. A merchant who cheated too boldly risked public shame, and word would spread quickly in the gossip of the market. But reputation could also make a seller flourish. A merchant known for fairness, for honesty in weights and generosity in measure, would attract loyal customers who returned week after week. For some, this loyalty was as valuable as gold, for it provided stability in a trade that was often unpredictable. Storms could ruin harvests, wars could disrupt trade routes, and illnesses could thin the crowd of buyers. A reputation for trustworthiness could keep a merchant's stall busy even in lean times. Merchants also formed a kind of social web among themselves. They borrowed from one another, traded goods behind the scenes, and sometimes formed alliances to control prices. They gossiped, they argued, they competed. Yet they also relied on one another, for no single merchant could provide everything the market demanded. A spice seller depended on the potter who sold jars to store his goods. A farmer relied on the smith who made the plow that had tilled his field. The market was not only a place of competition, but of interdependence, a web of lives tied together by necessity. For the buyer, every merchant was a character, a personality to be navigated as much as their goods. Some sellers were jovial, laughing easily, turning every bargain into a game. Others were stern, their faces unreadable, their voices flat as they named their prices. Some tried to charm, flattering their customers with compliments, while others relied on intimidation, making buyers feel foolish for even questioning the value of their wares. To shop in such a place was to perform a series of small encounters, each one shaped by the mood, the personality, and the skill of the merchant before you. And always, hovering beneath it all, was the understanding that both merchant and buyer needed one another. The seller had goods, but without customers, they were useless. The buyer had coins, but without goods, they were meaningless. Between them lay the art of negotiation, of exchange, of human connection, shaped by the rhythms of life itself. The merchants were the lifeblood of the ancient marketplace. Without them, the square would be silent, the stalls empty, the air still. With them, it was a place of motion, of color, of voices weaving together into the endless story of trade. To walk among them was to witness ambition, creativity, deception, honesty, and survival, all playing out before your eyes. Each merchant stood not only as a seller, but as a piece of the great puzzle that made the ancient marketplace what it was, a living, breathing heart of human society. If the merchants gave the market its heartbeat, the shoppers were its breath, filling and emptying the space with their presence, shaping the rhythm of each day. To shop in an ancient marketplace was not a passive act. It was a dance of movement, decision, and interaction. Every shopper, from the wealthiest noble to the humblest farmer's wife, came into that crowded square with purpose, and every purchase told a story about their needs, their status, and their place in society. At the top of the social ladder were the elite's wealthy landowners, officials, or members of noble households. They often did not come themselves, but sent servants to carry out their errands. When they did appear, however, their presence was impossible to miss. They moved with confidence, their clothing made of fine fabrics that set them apart from the ordinary crowd. The merchants treated them with deference, knowing that a single purchase from such a customer could outweigh dozens of smaller sales. These elites were not in the marketplace simply to buy goods. They were there to be seen, to reinforce their prestige. Selecting a rare spice, a polished piece of jewelry, or a brightly dyed fabric was as much a declaration of status as it was a practical act of shopping. Their servants carried baskets behind them, laden with goods, while the noble might linger in conversation, commanding attention with both wealth and authority. But the marketplace did not belong solely to the wealthy. The largest part of the crowd was made up of ordinary townsfolk farmers' wives, craftsmen, small traders, and laborers, each of whom depended on the market for the essentials of life. These were the buyers who moved with intensity, eyes scanning stalls, fingers probing fruits for ripeness, ears sharp to every claim made by merchants. They bargained fiercely, not out of sport, but because every coin mattered. A loaf of bread too expensive might mean less oil for cooking. A poor deal struck today could ripple into hardship tomorrow. For them, the marketplace was a test of skill as much as a place of supply, a daily contest where careful judgment and sharp bargaining made the difference between plenty and want. Among them, you could see mothers guiding their children through the crowd, teaching them how to recognize quality, how to count coins, and how to haggle with confidence. These children absorbed lessons in survival with every market visit, learning the ways of trade long before they could participate fully themselves. Young boys ran errands with small baskets, delivering produce back to households, while young girls watched their mothers argue over the price of olive oil, their eyes wide, their ears tuned to the quick rhythm of negotiation. The market was a school as much as a store, shaping the skills of the next generation. Foreigners stood out, their accents and clothing marking them as outsiders. Some came to buy, eager to sample local goods or secure supplies for their journeys. Others came to sell, their stalls filled with wares from distant lands. For locals, these figures were both fascinating and suspicious. A foreign merchant's goods might be highly desired, strange fruits, fine cloth, unusual trinkets, but his unfamiliar ways might also invite mistrust. For the foreign shopper, every interaction carried risk. Prices could be raised unfairly. Tricks played more easily on someone unfamiliar with local customs. Yet the exchange between foreigner and local also infused the marketplace with a sense of wonder, a reminder that the world stretched far beyond the city walls. The poor, too, were ever present, though their presence was often marked more by struggle than by purchase. Some carried a handful of coins, seeking the cheapest food to keep hunger at bay. Others had nothing at all, moving through the crowd in hopes of alms or scraps left behind. Beggars stretched out hands, their voices weaving into the chorus of the marketplace, pleading for generosity. For them, the market was not about trade, but about survival, about the slim chance that kindness might be shown in the midst of so much exchange. Their presence was a reminder of the harsh divides in society, where some weighed jewels in their hands, while others begged for bread. Every shopper entered the market with strategies. The cautious arrived early, hoping to claim the freshest goods before they were taken. The thrifty arrived late, willing to risk leftovers in exchange for lower prices. Some relied on loyalty to particular merchants, trusting their honesty, while others wandered from stall to stall, comparing prices and playing one seller against another. Each decision required awareness. Was the meat fresh or beginning to sour in the heat? Was the cloth truly dyed with costly pigments, or with something cheap that would fade? Was the merchant's smile a sign of friendliness, or an attempt to distract from a flaw in the product? To shop in the market was to constantly judge, weigh, and calculate, every choice a small act of survival. And yet, for all its practical purpose, shopping was also a social act. Friends greeted one another in the crowded lanes, pausing to exchange gossip as they selected fruit. Families made purchases together, discussing what meals would be prepared in the days ahead. News traveled through the marketplace faster than through any official channel. A war in a neighboring kingdom, a marriage in a noble household, the spread of illness in a nearby village, all of it passed from mouth to mouth, woven into casual conversation as easily as the price of bread. For many, the marketplace was their connection to the wider world, their way of staying tied to the pulse of society. There was also pleasure in the act of browsing itself. Even those who had little to spend might linger over the stalls, letting their eyes feast on bright fabrics or rare trinkets. To touch a polished bowl, to smell a fragrant spice, to imagine owning a piece of jewelry, even if one could not buy it, was a way of tasting the richness of life. Children pressed their noses to baskets of sweets, dreaming of flavors they might never afford. Women ran their fingers over fine cloth, imagining dresses that would remain out of reach. The market was not only about what one took home, but about the experience of seeing, touching, smelling, and hearing the abundance of human creativity. Shoppers also carried with them expectations of ritual. It was not enough simply to hand over coins. The process of haggling, of testing, of questioning, was part of the culture itself. To accept the first price was to be seen as naive, even foolish. A good shopper was expected to push back, to show skill in negotiation. Sometimes the bargaining ended in raised voices, hands thrown up in mock despair, or even laughter when both sides finally agreed on a price that felt fair. This ritual gave the act of shopping a sense of performance, turning each purchase into a tiny drama in which both buyer and seller played their parts. The shoppers gave the marketplace its pulse, moving in waves that surged and ebbed throughout the day. In their footsteps lay the true meaning of the market, not only an exchange of goods, but an exchange of human lives, of needs and desires, of pride and struggle. Every coin spent was a story, every purchase a reflection of the world in which these people lived. The market was not only where they fed their bodies, it was where they revealed who they were. The act of haggling was at the very core of ancient shopping, and for many people, it was the most thrilling and sometimes the most exhausting part of a market day. Unlike the fixed prices of modern stores, nothing in the ancient marketplace carried a tag. Every transaction was a small contest, a tug-of-war between the merchant and the customer, where skill, wit, and even patience determined the outcome. To enter the market was to step into a world where every purchase became a negotiation, and every negotiation became a test of character. The ritual often began with the merchant calling out an enticing price, one designed not to reflect the true worth of the item, but to set the stage for bargaining. A farmer selling figs might declare, fresh from the orchard, 2 coins for a basket, even though he expected to accept 1 coin if pressed. A potter might praise the perfection of his bowl, claiming its glaze shimmered like water, while quietly knowing he would settle for half the first price if it meant making the sale. For the buyer, the first price was never the end. It was the opening move in a delicate dance. The customer's response was equally important. To accept the first offer was to invite mockery, a sign of inexperience or weakness. The seasoned shopper would scoff, shake their head, and counter with an offer that was deliberately low, sometimes laughably so. This exchange of offers and counteroffers could stretch into long conversations, voices rising and falling like waves. Hands gestured in exasperation, eyes rolled in mock despair, and sometimes both merchant and buyer laughed, knowing that beneath the performance lay a mutual understanding. Both wanted the sale, both wanted to feel victorious. For many, haggling was not merely a necessity, but a source of pride. To bargain well was to show intelligence and strength, to prove one could not be easily fooled. Families passed down the art of negotiation as carefully as they taught farming or cooking. Children watched their parents haggle, absorbing not only the techniques, but the tone of voice, the timing of silence, the strategic moment to walk away and then return. To be cheated was shameful, a mark not only against the purse, but against one's reputation. People told stories of those who paid too much, shaking their heads with pity or disdain. Merchants, of course, were masters of their craft. Some used charm, showering buyers with compliments, suggesting that a fabric matched their eyes, or that a piece of jewelry made them look regal. Others used intimidation, frowning at low offers, insisting that they would lose money, that the buyer was insulting their honesty. Some merchants relied on clever tricks, placing weights that looked heavier than they were, filling jars of oil slightly short of the top, or mixing expensive spices with cheaper substitutes. A buyer had to be alert, testing goods with their senses. Grain was sifted through fingers, cloth was held up to the light, wine was tasted before being poured into a jar. Every sense was a weapon against deceit. Haggling was also a performance meant for the crowd. Deals were often struck in public, with others watching and listening. To win a bargain was not only to save money, but to earn admiration from those nearby. A clever customer might raise their voice in triumph when the merchant finally agreed to a fair price, drawing approving nods from passers-by. Conversely, to be seen as outwitted could damage one's standing. This public aspect made haggling both exhilarating and risky, a small theater of pride and reputation. Not all haggling ended in purchase. Sometimes the buyer walked away, refusing to compromise, while the merchant shouted after them, offering a final discount in desperation. Other times, the merchant let the customer leave, trusting that hunger or desire would bring them back later. The act of walking away was itself a bargaining tool, a signal of strength. But it was also a gamble, for another shopper might swoop in and buy the item in question. The market thrived on this tension, every exchange balanced on the edge of decision. The pace of haggling shifted throughout the day. In the early morning, merchants held firm, their goods fresh and plentiful, their confidence high. They demanded higher prices, knowing eager shoppers would pay for first choice. By midday, as the crowd swelled and goods began to dwindle, merchants grew more flexible, more willing to compromise. By evening, as the market prepared to close, bargaining became most intense. Merchants feared carrying perishable goods back home, and customers knew it. A basket of fruit that had been held at 3 coins in the morning might be sold for 1 coin before nightfall. The experienced shopper learned to time their purchases, knowing when patience would win the best deal. For travelers and foreigners, haggling was even more complicated. Their accents, clothing, and unfamiliarity with local customs made them easy targets. Merchants inflated prices shamelessly, testing how much the stranger was willing to pay. Yet some foreigners quickly adapted, learning the rhythms of negotiation, even using their exotic status to their advantage. A merchant might be eager to claim that a traveler from far away had chosen their stall, using the sale itself as a form of advertisement. Thus, the outsider who haggled well could earn both respect and fair treatment, while those who did not risk walking away cheated and mocked. Though haggling could be tiring, it was also a form of connection. Buyer and seller shared in the ritual, their voices blending into the endless music of the market. Even when the bargaining was fierce, there was often laughter at the end, a sense of camaraderie born from the struggle. Both sides knew that without the other, the exchange could not happen. In this way, haggling was not just about coins and goods. It was about human interaction, about playing one's part in the great drama of daily life. For the ancient shopper, the marketplace was a place of contest and community alike. Every bargain struck was a victory. Every coin saved a small triumph. Every purchase a reflection of both need and skill. To shop in such a world was to engage constantly, to listen, to speak, to argue, to persuade. And while the goods changed hands, something less tangible was also exchanged: pride, reputation, and the satisfaction of knowing that one had played the game well. The marketplace was more than a place of trade. It was the very center of social life, a stage upon which the dramas of daily existence unfolded. To walk through its crowded lanes was to step into a web of human interaction where strangers became acquaintances, acquaintances became friends, and sometimes friends became rivals. It was the one place where every layer of society converged, and in that convergence, the marketplace became a mirror of the community itself. For many people, market day was the highlight of the week. In villages and smaller towns, daily life was dominated by work in the fields, workshops, or households, with little variation from one day to the next. The arrival of the market broke that monotony. It offered the chance to see neighbors, to exchange greetings, to gossip about marriages, births, or scandals, and to feel the rhythm of society in a way that no other gathering could provide. People lingered at stalls not only to buy, but to talk, turning each purchase into a chance to connect. The gossip of the marketplace was as valuable as the goods. Here news spread more quickly than through official messengers or proclamations. A farmer might overhear rumors of a poor harvest in a neighboring village while buying grain, or a potter might learn of a new tax being imposed while selling his wares. Stories of distant wars, political upheavals, or the fall of kings were carried into the market by traders and travelers, their voices weaving foreign events into the local consciousness. For those who could not read, the market served as their newspaper, their bulletin board, and their theater of current events. Public life unfolded here in visible form. Wealthy elites made a show of their presence, their clothing bright and costly, their servants trailing behind them. They did not need to announce their status. It was visible in every gesture, every purchase, every interaction. To be seen buying expensive fabrics or spices was itself a declaration of power, a way to remind others of one's wealth. At the same time, the poor made their struggles just as visible. A mother haggling fiercely for bread, a beggar calling out for alms, a laborer counting his few coins. All of these sights reminded everyone of the gaps between rich and poor, woven into the fabric of daily life. The market also offered opportunities for entertainment. Storytellers held audiences spellbound, their voices rising and falling as they spun tales of ancient heroes or mischievous gods. Their performances not only entertained, but also taught, carrying moral lessons and cultural memory in the guise of simple amusement. Musicians added to the noise, their melodies floating through the air, blending with the shouts of merchants. Jugglers, acrobats, and dancers claimed small spaces at the edges of the crowd, their tricks drawing children and adults alike. Even those who had no money to spend could enjoy these spectacles, finding in them a reminder of joy amidst the struggle of survival. Religious life often found its place in the marketplace as well. Priests might pass through to bless the crowd or to collect offerings. Temples or shrines were often built near market squares, their presence a reminder that the divine was woven into the fabric of commerce. Shoppers might stop to light incense, pray for prosperity, or give thanks for successful trade. Festivals and religious holidays often spilled into the market, transforming it into a place of ritual as much as exchange. In this way, the marketplace tied together the spiritual and the material, the sacred and the mundane. It was also a place where identities mingled. Men and women, rich and poor, locals and foreigners, all came together in one shared space. For some, this mingling was unsettling, a blurring of boundaries that challenged the strict divisions of society. For others, it was an opportunity, a chance to see beyond the limits of one's own world. Friendships might form between unlikely people, forged through repeated encounters at the same stall. Rivalries might grow just as easily, sparked by disputes over goods or gossip overheard. The market was a web of connections, some fragile, some strong, all shaping the rhythm of life. Children found in the marketplace a world of fascination. To them, it was a carnival of sights and sounds, bright fabrics fluttering in the breeze, animals bleating and braying, performers astonishing with their tricks, merchants calling out in loud, exaggerated voices. They learned by watching, absorbing the skills of haggling, the customs of trade, the gestures of respect or defiance. Many children played among the stalls, weaving through crowds, sometimes helping their parents, sometimes chasing one another in games that ignored the seriousness of adult concerns. The marketplace became their playground, their school, and their stage. Even disputes and conflicts contributed to the social life of the market. Quarrels broke out when merchants accused one another of stealing customers, or when buyers felt cheated. Arguments drew crowds, people eager to watch, to take sides, or to gossip afterward. Fistfights were not unknown, though more often the tension ended in shouting matches or in officials stepping in to restore order. These disputes, though disruptive, added to the sense that the marketplace was alive, unpredictable, and filled with drama. To shop in the market, then, was to take part in far more than commerce. It was to immerse oneself in a community's life, to hear its stories, see its divisions, feel its energy. Every purchase, every conversation, every gesture was woven into the fabric of social existence. For many, the market was the only place where they could feel fully a part of the wider world, standing shoulder to shoulder with their neighbors. hearing the voices of strangers and sensing that they were connected to something larger than themselves. The social life of the marketplace gave it a soul. Without it, the square would have been nothing more than stalls and coins. With it, the marketplace became a living organism, beating with the energy of its people, reflecting their joys and sorrows, their struggles and triumphs. To shop in such a place was to step into the heart of society itself, a heart that pulsed with every laugh, every bargain, every story told beneath the open sky. The ancient marketplace was not only a space of buying and selling, but also a theater of sights, smells, and sounds so overwhelming that it could feel like stepping into another world. If you closed your eyes for a moment and tried to imagine it, you would be drawn into a storm of sensations that defined the experience of shopping in such a place. These sensations were not mere background details. They were the essence of the market itself, weaving together into an atmosphere that imprinted itself on memory. The first and most immediate impression came through the nose. Scents mingled together in such abundance that it was impossible to separate one from another. There was the sharp spice of garlic and onions, carried from stalls where vegetables were piled high. The sweetness of ripe figs, dates, and pomegranates cut through the heavier odors, teasing with their promise of freshness. Over it all lingered the warm, earthy smell of bread baking in clay ovens, the air filled with the aroma of yeast and smoke. Meat roasting on spits released a savory richness, while nearby, the more pungent smell of freshly slaughtered animals reminded shoppers of the immediacy of life and death. Add to this the perfume of incense from distant lands, the resinous smell of pine and cedar wood, and the constant undertone of animals, goats, sheep, chickens, and donkeys, and you had a tapestry of smells as complex as any marketplace song. That song was woven from countless voices. Merchants shouted loudly, each vying to outdo the others, praising their goods in rhythmic cries. "Fresh fish! Just caught this morning!" Or "Fine cloth from the East, colors like you've never seen." Buyers responded in kind, sometimes laughing, sometimes scolding, their bargaining voices carrying equal weight. Children shrieked as they darted between stalls, their games punctuating the more serious business of trade. Musicians strummed lutes or beat hand drums, their rhythms echoing down the lanes. Storytellers raised their voices above the crowd, spinning tales of heroes and gods, their words occasionally drowned by the bray of a donkey or the call of a caged rooster. It was never silent. From dawn to dusk, the marketplace roared with a chorus of human and animal sound, a living song of commerce and community. Visually, the market was just as striking. Stalls overflowed with color and texture, creating a patchwork of sights that dazzled the eye. Brightly dyed fabrics, deep indigo, crimson, and golden yellow fluttered in the breeze. Piles of fruit glistened under the sun, their skins polished to brilliance. Clay jars stood in neat rows, some plain and sturdy, others decorated with painted patterns that swirled with artistry. Metal goods sparkled, polished bronze and copper catching the light in sudden flashes. Jewelry gleamed from trays lined with cloth, beads of glass or stone strung into necklaces that promised beauty for those who could afford them. Even the humblest stalls carried a visual richness, whether in the earthy brown of vegetables, the straw of baskets, or the dark sheen of oil poured into shallow dishes for display. The texture of the market was felt not only with the eyes, but with the skin. To move through the crowd was to brush against others, shoulders bumping, robes brushing, the press of humanity unavoidable. Dust rose beneath the endless tread of feet, clinging to sandals and clothing, coating the air until the tongue carried its dry grit. On rainy days, the ground turned to mud, thick and clinging, the market becoming a slippery chaos of carts and animals struggling to move. To touch the goods themselves was an experience rough cloth against fingers, smooth pottery cooling the palm, warm bread breaking softly at the touch, sharp herbs crumbling between thumb and forefinger. Every purchase demanded the test of touch, for eyes alone could not always tell the truth. Tastes, too, added to the experience. Many merchants offered samples to lure buyers. A drop of olive oil placed on the tongue revealed its richness or its poor quality. A sip of wine might sway a hesitant customer, its flavor either smooth and deep or sour and disappointing. Sweetmeats, figs, or dates were handed out in small pieces, tempting shoppers to buy more than they had planned. Children especially delighted in these offerings, their mouths sticky with honey or their teeth crunching roasted nuts. Shopping was not only a transaction of coins, but a feast of the senses, every taste deepening the memory of the day. Even the air seemed to carry texture and life. In the heat of midday, it pressed heavily, thick with the smells of cooking, sweat, and animals. In the cool of morning or evening, it carried a sharper freshness, the sounds ringing clearer, the scents less oppressive. The changing light added to the atmosphere, the golden glow of dawn making the market shimmer with promise the bright noon sun, glaring on pottery and metal the softer light of dusk, giving everything a subdued, tired beauty as the day wound down. For the shoppers, these sensations were both exhausting and exhilarating. They left the market carrying not only goods, but also impressions, the memory of a merchant, its booming laugh, the sting of bargaining words, the lingering sweetness of fruit, the vivid sight of fabric that caught the light just so. To visit the market was to be saturated with the fullness of human experience, to be reminded that life itself was noisy, fragrant, colorful, and unrelenting. In this way, the sensory atmosphere was not a backdrop, but the essence of the ancient shopping experience. Without it, the market would have been only a collection of stalls. With it, it became a living organism, a place where all the senses collided in constant motion. To shop in an ancient marketplace was to surrender to that flood of impressions, to let the sounds, smells, sights, and touches wash over you, until they became inseparable from the act of buying itself. The goods of the ancient marketplace were as diverse as the people who gathered there. To walk through its lanes was to be confronted with the full spectrum of human need and desire, from the simplest staples that sustained daily life to the rarest luxuries that only the wealthy could afford. Each stall carried not only items for sale, but also stories of labor, trade, and the journeys of objects across vast distances. Shopping here was as much about survival as it was about aspiration, for what you carried away in your basket could feed your family, adorn your home, or announce your status to the world. At the heart of the market were the staples of food, the essentials without which no household could function. Grain, in its many forms, was king. Merchants sold wheat, barley, millet, or rice, measured out in baskets or scooped into sacks with wooden ladles. These grains formed the foundation of bread, porridge, and other daily meals. Buyers examined them carefully, running hands through piles to test for freshness, searching for hidden stones or signs of rot. Alongside grain came legumes, lentils, beans, chickpeas, rich sources of nourishment that could stretch a family's meals. These humble items were not glamorous, but they were the backbone of life, and much of the bargaining energy of the market was spent around them. Fruits and vegetables added color and freshness to the stalls. Figs, dates, and pomegranates were favorites, their sweetness a welcome relief from plainer foods. Apples and pears, when in season, offered crispness and variety, while grapes could be eaten fresh or dried into raisins for longer storage. Vegetables varied by region, but often included onions, leeks, garlic, and cabbages, their sharp scents filling the air. Herbs such as parsley, dill, or coriander were tied in bundles, their green fragrance rising from baskets. Shoppers bent low to inspect the produce, smelling, touching, and sometimes biting into samples before making a purchase. The display of fruits and vegetables was not only practical, but also beautiful, a reminder of nature's abundance. Meat and fish brought a different energy to the market. Slaughtered animals hung from hooks, their red flesh stark against the dusty backdrop. Butchers shouted their wares, knives flashing as they cut portions to order. Meat was expensive, often reserved for the wealthier classes or for special occasions, yet its presence was essential to the market's vibrancy. Chickens squawked from cages, goats tugged at ropes, and sometimes even pigs were herded through the stalls to be sold alive. Fishmongers displayed their catch on beds of herbs or cool leaves, their scales glistening in the sun. The smell was strong, sometimes unpleasant, yet it drew crowds eager for the freshness of the sea. Dairy products provided variety as well. Clay jars filled with milk, rounds of cheese wrapped in cloth, and pats of butter softened in the sun offered a richness that complemented bread and grain. These goods were highly perishable. Making their presence in the market, urgent buyers had to act quickly, and sellers had to move their goods before spoilage. The tangy scent of cheese and the creamy taste of milk added to the market sensory abundance. Staples were joined by luxuries that elevated the experience of shopping. Spices were among the most coveted. Tiny piles of saffron threads, peppercorns, cinnamon sticks, and cloves sat in small containers, their scents so powerful they seemed to dominate entire sections of the market. These were not just flavors, but treasures, carried across deserts and seas, their high prices reflecting the dangers of their journeys. Perfumes and incense likewise added exotic charm. Frankincense, myrrh, and other resins burned to test their fragrance, sending sweet smoke into the air. Buyers leaned close, inhaling deeply, knowing that such purchases were not necessities, but markers of status and refinement. Cloth and textiles formed another important category of goods. Weavers displayed bolts of fabric dyed in brilliant colors, from earthy browns to vivid blues and purples. Linen, wool, and sometimes silk could be found, depending on the region and the wealth of the market. Clothing was a visible declaration of identity, and buyers chose carefully, weighing cost against appearance. The feel of the cloth between fingers, the richness of its color in the light, the tightness of its weave, all were signs of its value. To buy fabric was to buy more than material. It was to shape how one would be seen by neighbors and strangers alike. Household goods were everywhere. Potters sold bowls, jugs, lamps, and storage jars, their surfaces sometimes plain, sometimes painted with intricate designs. Baskets of all sizes were woven from reeds or straw, essential for carrying and storing. Wooden spoons, knives, and tools filled smaller stalls, their usefulness obvious to every shopper. Metal goods added a sharper edge: knives, axes, chisels, or even decorative items. Some were purely functional, others works of art in their own right. These were the silent necessities of life, the tools that made survival possible, each one representing countless hours of labor by unseen hands. Jewelry and adornments provided the sparkle of luxury. Beads of glass, stone, or bone, strung into necklaces and bracelets, gleamed in the sunlight. Bronze or copper rings, earrings, and bangles drew the eyes of passers-by, their polished surfaces promising beauty. For the truly wealthy, gold or silver pieces might be displayed, often accompanied by whispered claims of their rarity. These items were not just decorations. They carried symbolic weight, marking status, wealth, or even spiritual meaning. A necklace could be a charm, a bracelet a declaration of love, a ring a sign of loyalty or belonging. Animals themselves were part of the goods for sale. Donkeys, oxen, goats, and sheep stood tethered in noisy clusters, their presence impossible to ignore. For many buyers, these animals were more valuable than gold, for they provided milk, labor, wool, or meat. To buy an animal was a serious investment, one that could change a family's fortunes for years. The bargaining here was intense, often involving entire families and long discussions, for the stakes were high. Every stall, every item, reflected the interconnectedness of life. A pot of honey spoke of bees tended in quiet fields. A bolt of cloth hinted at sheep sheared, wool spun, and dye carried from distant lands. A jar of olive oil told the story of trees grown for generations, their fruit pressed in heavy stone mills. The marketplace was a living museum of human labor, every item carrying the weight of effort and the touch of countless hands. To shop here was to step into that web of connections, to carry home not just goods, but the echoes of the work, the journeys, and the lives behind them. The goods of the ancient marketplace were never just things. They were threads in the vast tapestry of human survival and expression, each one shimmering with meaning in the crowded square. One of the most striking things about shopping in an ancient marketplace was the sheer diversity of people who crossed paths there. The marketplace was not a quiet corner reserved for a single class or group. It was a crossroads of humanity, where farmers and nobles, foreigners and locals, beggars and merchants all moved together in the same noisy, crowded space. To walk through the market was to see society laid bare, its divisions and its connections, its tensions and its shared lifeblood. At dawn, when the first stalls opened, you might see farmers arriving from the countryside, their carts heavy with produce, their clothes still dusted with soil. Their faces were browned by the sun, their hands rough from labor. They brought onions, leeks, cabbages, beans, and baskets of grain, the ordinary foods that sustained most families. These men and women often looked out of place beside the urban crowd, their accents marking them as outsiders, their movements slower, more deliberate. Yet they were indispensable, for without their goods, the city could not survive. By mid-morning, the local townsfolk began to flood the market. Craftsmen seeking tools, mothers shopping for daily bread, young men with coins to spend on wine or sweets. These were the heart of the crowd. Their voices filled the air as they haggled, laughed, and argued with merchants. Their clothes were plain but clean, practical for everyday life. They brought with them not only their coins, but their chatter, their news, their energy, turning the market into the true hub of community life. Among them moved the wealthy, their status announced before they even spoke. Nobles and wealthy merchants often wore finer fabrics dyed in expensive colors, deep purples, vivid reds, or bright blues that common people could rarely afford. Gold rings glinted on their fingers, necklaces caught the sunlight on their necks. These figures did not always haggle. Sometimes they paid high prices deliberately, as if to show that they did not need to argue over coin. Their presence brought a kind of spectacle, for all eyes followed them, even as merchants scrambled to offer them the best goods. To be seen shopping was, for them, as important as the act of buying itself. Travelers and foreigners added another layer of richness to the crowd. They came with accents unfamiliar to local ears, wearing clothing from distant lands. Some were traders, their stalls piled with exotic wares, spices that filled the air with strange scents, glass beads that sparkled in the sun, fabrics whose patterns spoke of faraway cultures. Others were buyers, seeking food and goods for their journeys, their coin purses tempting merchants eager for easy sales. To locals, foreigners were both a curiosity and a caution. Their presence was a reminder of the wider world, of the caravans and ships that tied the city to distant lands. But their strangeness also invited suspicion, for differences in speech and dress made them easy targets for higher prices or for gossip whispered behind their backs. At the edges of the market, the poor and the desperate lingered. Beggars called out with thin voices, their hands stretched toward the passing crowd. Children with hollow cheeks wandered close to food stalls, their eyes fixed hungrily on piles of fruit or baskets of bread. Some begged openly. Others waited until the market closed, hoping to gather scraps or unsold goods left behind. Their presence was a constant reminder that prosperity was not shared equally, that wealth and poverty walked side by side through the same crowded lanes. The cries of beggars mingled with the shouts of merchants, forming a harsh counterpoint to the bustle of trade. Slaves, too, were a common sight in many ancient markets. Some came to shop on behalf of their masters, carrying baskets or jars, their heads lowered as they moved quickly through the crowd. Others were themselves for sale, lined up in rows while traders shouted their strengths, strong for labor, or skilled in weaving. Buyers inspected them as they would inspect animals, looking at their teeth, testing their muscles. For those enslaved, the market was not a place of freedom or community, but of exposure, where their humanity was reduced to a price. Their presence was woven into the fabric of trade, a reminder that markets dealt not only in goods, but also in human lives. Children added their own energy to the crowd. They darted between legs, played games in the dusty corners, or helped their parents with shopping. Some carried small baskets, learning early the skills of bargaining and judgment. Others simply gawked at the spectacle, musicians, jugglers, storytellers, all the marvels of the market that seemed to them like magic. Their laughter rose above the harsher voices, reminding everyone that even in a place of business, joy had its place. The diversity of the marketplace was its greatest strength and its greatest challenge. It brought together people who might never otherwise meet, forcing them to share space, to interact, to trade. It also highlighted the divisions of society, making visible the contrasts of wealth and poverty, freedom and slavery, local and foreign. Yet in the end, all these groups were bound together by the simple act of exchange. The farmer needed tools, the noble needed food, the foreign trader needed local buyers, the beggar needed alms. The market was the one place where their paths crossed, where their fates intertwined, even if only for a moment. To shop in an ancient marketplace was to step into this human mosaic. Every face, every voice, every gesture added to the great painting of society, its colors vivid, its shapes shifting, its meaning endless. You could not leave the market without carrying some piece of it with you, whether it was food in your basket, news in your ears, or the memory of the countless lives you brushed against in the crowded lanes. The rhythm of the ancient marketplace was tied closely to the passing of the seasons and the cycles of nature. Unlike the modern world, where goods are often available year-round, the market's offerings changed with the time of year, its colors and scents shifting as the calendar turned. To shop in such a place was to feel, with every purchase, the pulse of the natural world, the abundance and scarcity that came with it. Spring brought the first signs of renewal. Farmers arrived with baskets of fresh greens, lettuce, leeks, and tender herbs just pulled from the soil. Fruit trees offered early harvests of figs or cherries, their sweetness a welcome change after the lean winter months. Markets during spring were filled with excitement, the air buzzing with energy as people welcomed new flavors after months of dried or preserved food. Sheep and goats, fattened through the winter, were sometimes sold at this time, their milk turned into soft cheeses that were eagerly bought by those longing for fresh taste. Spring was a season of promise, when stalls seemed to declare that life itself was beginning anew. Summer was the time of greatest abundance. The stalls overflowed with fruits, melons, grapes, apricots, and berries, piled high in baskets that glistened in the sun. Vegetables came in variety and plenty: cucumbers, beans, onions, and squashes, their freshness evident in their bright colors and crisp textures. Herbs were plentiful, tied into fragrant bundles of mint, dill, or basil. Honey, collected in larger amounts during the warm months, was sold in clay jars, its golden sweetness catching the light. This was also the season for festivals, when markets swelled not only with food, but with celebratory goods, garlands of flowers, perfumes, and colorful fabrics. Shopping in summer was an indulgence for the senses, the market a rite of color and flavor that seemed to mirror the richness of the season itself. Autumn was the season of preparation. It brought the great harvests: wheat, barley, and other grains carried in sacks and piled high in stalls. Farmers sold surplus to earn coin, while families stocked up for the winter ahead. Grapes were sold not only fresh, but pressed into jars of juice and early wine. Olives were gathered, their oil pressed and poured into amphorae, ready to be traded and stored. Nuts filled baskets, almonds, walnuts, and chestnuts that promised nourishment through the cold months. Dried fruits became common, figs and dates preserved to last. The marketplace in autumn carried a sense of urgency, as if everyone knew the long winter was coming and rushed to fill their homes with enough to endure it. Winter markets were smaller, quieter, and far less colorful. The stalls showed the limits of preservation: salted fish, dried beans, nuts, and whatever root vegetables could last through the cold. Bread and porridge became staples, and luxuries like fresh fruit were rare, sometimes only available to the wealthy who could afford imports brought from warmer lands. Meat, often cured or salted, was sold more frequently in this season, as animals that could not be fed through the winter were slaughtered. The market air in winter carried fewer bright scents, more of smoke, salt, and the earthy heaviness of stored goods. Yet even in its sparseness, the marketplace remained vital, for it was the thread that kept communities tied to survival when the world outside lay barren. The seasonal cycle shaped not only what was sold, but also how people shopped. In spring and summer, buyers lingered over fresh goods, tasting and choosing carefully, indulging in the richness of the season. In autumn, they bought in bulk, calculating how much grain or oil would be needed to last through winter. In winter, they purchased with caution, balancing hunger with scarcity, careful not to waste what little remained. Every season carried its own rhythm of haggling, its own urgency, its own atmosphere. Beyond food, other goods also reflected the seasons. Textiles changed with the weather-lighter fabrics sought in summer, heavier cloaks and furs in winter. Fuel for fires became an important commodity as the cold months approached, with wood and charcoal rising in price when demand was highest. Even perfumes and oils shifted with the seasons, their scents chosen to suit the mood of the time. The market was not static. It was a living calendar, its stalls and goods moving in harmony with the natural world. The festivals of the year further punctuated this rhythm. Religious or civic celebrations often brought special goods to the market: flowers for garlands, wine for feasting, animals for sacrifice, or sweets for children. These times swelled the crowd, drawing people not only for trade but for joy. The marketplace became a place of ceremony, a stage for the blending of the sacred and the ordinary. To shop during a festival was to feel swept up in celebration, surrounded by goods that symbolized abundance and gratitude. Shopping in the ancient marketplace, then, was never the same twice. The market you visited in spring was not the one you would see in winter. Its goods, its colors, even its smells changed with the seasons, reminding all who entered of their dependence on nature's cycles. To shop here was to live in tune with the earth, to feel in one's very stomach the rise and fall of the seasons, the generosity of summer, the warning of autumn, the austerity of winter, and the rebirth of spring. Beyond its function as a place of trade, the ancient marketplace was a stage for entertainment, a space where commerce mingled with spectacle. To shop, there was to be surrounded not only by merchants and buyers, but by performers who turned the square into a living theater. For many, these diversions were as much a draw as the goods themselves, offering laughter, wonder, and a brief escape from the ordinary struggles of life. Musicians were among the most common entertainers. They sat at busy intersections, or walked through the crowd with small instruments, lutes, flutes, lyres, or drums filling the air with music that rose above the hum of voices. Their melodies varied from solemn tunes that carried a haunting beauty to fast, lively songs that set feet tapping and children dancing. Some played for coin, a dish or hat placed in front of them to collect the generosity of passers-by. Others played as part of their trade, selling instruments or songs to accompany religious ceremonies, weddings, or feasts. The sound of their music became part of the market's pulse, weaving joy into the noise of haggling. Storytellers commanded crowds with nothing but their voices and gestures. They stood on overturned crates or low platforms, spinning tales of gods and heroes, kings and battles, or clever tricksters who outwitted the mighty. Their words carried the weight of tradition, passing down history and myth to audiences who often could not read, but who remembered every detail told aloud. Children gathered at their feet, their mouths open in wonder, while adults listened with equal fascination, letting themselves be carried away into worlds of imagination. These performances were not only entertainment, but also lessons, shaping the values, beliefs, and cultural memory of the people who heard them. Jugglers and acrobats brought movement and surprise. They tossed clay jars into the air, balanced on ropes strung between posts, or contorted their bodies in feats that seemed to defy nature. Their performances drew gasps and applause, coins tossed at their feet in appreciation. For children especially, these spectacles were irresistible, and for adults, they were a reminder of the joy found in simple marvels. The market, filled with practical concerns of buying and selling, was transformed into a space of delight when such performers took the stage. Animals, too, sometimes became part of the show. Trained monkeys performed tricks, dogs leapt through hoops, or exotic creatures were displayed for curious eyes. Merchants who traveled from distant lands sometimes used animals as living advertisements, their camels or brightly feathered birds attracting attention to their stalls. People gathered not only to see the goods, but to marvel at creatures they had never before encountered, their presence turning the market into a place of wonder. Religious and ceremonial performers also appeared in the marketplace. Priests might recite hymns or chants, drawing small crowds who joined in prayer. Dancers sometimes performed in honor of festivals, their movements both sacred and entertaining. These moments blurred the line between worship and spectacle, reminding shoppers that the market was not separate from the spiritual life of the community, but deeply entwined with it. Even ordinary merchants became entertainers in their own way. Their cries to advertise goods often turned into songs, rhymes, or playful banter. Some merchants were famous for their humor, using jokes to draw customers in, their wit as valuable as their wares. Others staged small demonstrations, breaking a pot to show the strength of another, slicing fruit to prove its ripeness, pouring oil to demonstrate its purity. These acts blurred the boundary between selling and performing, for in the market, every gesture was designed to capture attention. The market was also a place for public speeches and announcements. Officials used its open space to declare new laws, taxes, or decrees, their words echoing over the crowd. Political figures sometimes addressed the people directly, seeking support or stirring loyalty. For those gathered, these speeches became part of the day's entertainment, listened to with interest, skepticism, or even amusement. The market, as the heart of the community, was the stage where authority performed its power. But entertainment was not only about organized acts. It emerged spontaneously from the crowd itself. A heated argument between two buyers could draw a ring of onlookers, their shouts and gestures as engaging as any staged play. A drunk staggering through the lanes might provoke laughter, his antics watched with a mix of scorn and amusement. Children inventing games with pebbles or sticks created their own small theater, their laughter carrying through the air. In a place so filled with people, even the ordinary could become performance. This constant presence of entertainment turned the marketplace into more than a site of necessity. It became a gathering of community spirit, a place where joy, wonder, and laughter were as vital as bread and oil. Shoppers came not only to fill their baskets, but to fill their minds and hearts with stories, music, and spectacle. The market was alive in every sense, and its performers, whether skilled entertainers or ordinary people, ensured that its life was never dull. To shop in an ancient marketplace was to step into a world where every corner held not only goods but stories. Every stall offered not only food but music. Every path carried the possibility of surprise. Entertainment and commerce danced together, making the market not only the heart of trade, but the beating heart of culture itself. To understand the ancient marketplace fully, One must also imagine the place it occupied within the city itself. Markets were rarely hidden or tucked away. They were positioned at the very heart of urban life, woven into the daily movements of people so that no one could ignore them. To shop in such a place was not only to enter a space of trade, but to step into the architectural and cultural center of the community. In many cities, the marketplace took the form of a great open square. The ground was often packed earth, sometimes paved with stone, worn smooth by countless feet. Around the edges stood permanent stalls or simple wooden frames covered with cloth or reeds, while in the center, merchants set up temporary tables or spread their goods on blankets. The square was usually surrounded by important buildings, temples, government halls, or guild houses, so that the act of shopping was visually tied to both religion and authority. To buy a loaf of bread while standing in the shadow of a temple or near the seat of political power was to feel the interconnection of daily life, spirituality, and governance. In Greek cities, the agora was the most famous example. It was not just a market, but a gathering place, a wide space where philosophers debated, politicians spoke, and ordinary citizens mingled with one another. In Rome, the Forum served a similar role, with a sale of goods mixed with legal disputes, public speeches, and religious ceremonies. These were not markets in isolation. They were the true centers of civic life. To visit them was to participate in the pulse of the city itself. In smaller towns or rural villages, the market might be held in a less monumental setting. Sometimes it was little more than an open field near the town gate, where farmers laid out their produce and traders stopped on their journeys. At other times, the market was held once a week, transforming an ordinary street or square into a buzzing center of exchange. Even without the grandeur of stone columns or great temples, these village markets carried the same energy, for they too gathered people together, linking their lives through trade and conversation. Architecture shaped the experience of shopping. Covered colonnades provided shade from the harsh sun, their cool shadows a relief on hot days. Arched roofs or simple awnings offered protection from sudden rain, ensuring that the market continued in almost any weather. Water fountains or wells were often nearby, allowing both people and animals to refresh themselves, their trickling sounds blending with the hum of voices. Narrow alleys led in and out of the market, their paths lined with smaller stalls that specialized in particular goods bakers clustered together, potters in another row, spice sellers in yet another. The organization was rarely strict, but patterns emerged, and shoppers came to know where to find what they sought. The centrality of the market meant it was also the site of civic rituals. Official decrees were read aloud here, posted on stone tablets or shouted by heralds to the crowd. Public punishments sometimes took place at the edges of the market, serving as both warning and spectacle to the gathered people. Religious processions often passed through, stopping at temples that bordered the square. In this way, the marketplace was more than a commercial hub. It was the stage upon which the city's identity was performed. Markets also reflected the geography of their cities. Coastal towns saw stalls filled with fish, sea salt, and shells, their sounds accompanied by the cries of gulls circling overhead. Inland cities near fertile valleys overflowed with grain, fruits, and wine, their markets fragrant with the richness of harvest. Desert towns became crossroads for caravans, their stalls filled with exotic goods, incense, spices, and fine cloth that bore the dust of long journeys. Each market was shaped by its location, a reflection of the land that sustained it and the trade routes that connected it to the wider world. Even the size and design of the marketplace carried meaning. A large, organized market signaled prosperity, stability, and civic pride. The grand columns of a Greek agora or the towering arches of a Roman forum declared to all who entered, "This city is powerful, this community is thriving." Smaller, more chaotic markets spoke of different values, of survival, of immediacy, of communities bound less by grandeur and more by necessity. In both cases, The marketplace was a mirror, reflecting the society that built and sustained it. For the shopper, the architecture and location shaped the very feel of the experience. To stroll through a shaded colonnade while considering bolts of fabric was a different sensation than to haggle under the blazing sun in a dusty square. To buy bread beside a temple of marble gave the act a sense of dignity, while to purchase onions on the edge of a muddy street grounded it in the grit of daily life. The design of the space was not just practical. It was emotional, affecting how people felt as they moved through the market's lanes. In this way, the ancient marketplace was more than a collection of stalls. It was an urban heart, designed and positioned to be unavoidable, to draw people together again and again. Shopping there was never only about goods, it was about stepping into the center of civic, religious, and social life, about standing in the place where the community revealed itself most fully. To walk through its paths was to walk through the essence of the city itself. If the marketplace was the heart of ancient society, then trade routes were its veins and arteries, carrying lifeblood in the form of goods, ideas, and people from faraway lands. To shop in an ancient market was to experience not only local produce and handmade wares, but also treasures that had traveled across deserts, seas, and mountains. These items carried with them the scent of distant places, and their presence transformed the market into a crossroads of the world. Spices were among the most prized imports. Pepper from India, cinnamon from Ceylon, and saffron from Persia arrived in tiny quantities, their costs so high that only the wealthy could afford them. To buy even a handful was to taste the world beyond the horizon. These spices were valued not only for flavor, but for their rarity, and to own them was a sign of sophistication and wealth. Their strong scents dominated corners of the market, drawing curious shoppers who inhaled deeply, even if they could not afford to purchase. Textiles also traveled great distances. Silk from China, shimmering and delicate, was carried along the vast Silk Road by caravans that passed through countless hands before it reached Mediterranean ports. Wool dyed in the famed purple of Tyre, produced from thousands of tiny sea snails, commanded staggering prices and marked the highest rank of nobility. Cotton fabrics, lighter and softer than wool or linen, made their way from India, their exotic feel sparking wonder among those who touched them. To buy such cloth was to buy into a story of travel and transformation, each fold of fabric holding within it the journey of continents. Metals and stones added their own allure. Tin from distant mines in Britain mixed with copper from Cyprus to produce bronze, the metal of tools and weapons. Gold and silver traveled from mountains and rivers far from the city, their gleam captivating buyers who saw in them both beauty and wealth. Precious stones, emeralds, sapphires, carnelian, and lapis lazuli were sometimes displayed in small, carefully guarded stalls. These items were more than adornments. They were symbols of power, wealth, and even divine favor, their rarity making them as much talismans as ornaments. Perfumes and incense came from Arabia and beyond. Frankincense and myrrh, carried by camel caravans through harsh deserts, arrived as lumps of resin that, when burned, filled the air with sweetness. These were used not only in households, but in temples, connecting the material world of the market to the spiritual realm of worship. Perfumed oils, mixed with herbs and flowers, offered luxury in a small vial, their scent lingering long after the coins had changed hands. Exotic foods added to the fascination. Dates from desert oases, almonds from distant groves, honey from faraway hives, and rare wines from fertile valleys brought tastes that expanded the palate beyond local flavors. Some foods were bought not for daily meals, but for feasts, celebrations, or offerings to the gods. To present guests with foreign delicacies was to impress, to demonstrate wealth and connections that reached beyond the city walls. The arrival of foreign traders themselves brought excitement. Their clothing marked them as different brightly patterned fabrics, turbans, or cloaks unfamiliar to local eyes. Their accents carried strange sounds, and their manners could be unusual, provoking both curiosity and suspicion. They often told stories of the lands they had crossed, deserts where sand stretched farther than the eye could see, mountains where snow never melted, or seas filled with creatures unlike any known locally. These stories were part of the sales pitch, for to buy a piece of jewelry, a spice, or a cloth from such a trader was not merely to acquire a good, but to acquire a fragment of a distant world. But long-distance trade also carried risks. Goods that traveled far were subject to theft, spoilage, or the simple unpredictability of weather and war. Caravans crossing deserts risked sandstorms and raiders. Ships carrying goods across seas faced storms, pirates, or the dangers of wreck. Every item that reached the market carried within it the hidden cost of that journey, reflected in its high price. Shoppers, even as they haggled, often marveled at the fact that such treasures had survived to reach their hands. Local authorities often profited from this trade. Taxes and tariffs were imposed at city gates, ensuring that foreign goods enriched not only merchants but governments. This added to the value of imported items, making them both a financial prize and a political statement. To buy such goods was to participate, however indirectly, in the vast networks of commerce and power that stretched across ancient civilizations. For the ordinary shopper, imported goods were often beyond reach, but their presence still shaped the market. Even those who could not buy were drawn to look, to touch, to smell, to imagine. Children gawked at shimmering silks. Women lingered over vials of perfume. Men discussed the merits of foreign metals. The foreign trader's stall became a place of wonder, a reminder that the world was vast and filled with possibilities beyond the familiar. Thus, the ancient marketplace was never only local. It was connected by invisible threads to distant lands, its goods carrying the weight of journeys, its merchants embodying the courage of travel. To shop there was to encounter the world in miniature, to stand in one place while touching the edges of deserts, mountains, and seas. Each foreign item was a bridge to another land, each purchase a connection to something far beyond the boundaries of home. The ancient marketplace was not simply a free-for-all of buyers and sellers shouting over one another. It was also a space governed by laws, customs, and watchful eyes. Though the clamor and chaos might seem unruly, there was always an underlying structure that held the market together, ensuring that trade could happen with some measure of fairness and order. Without rules, the market might collapse into fraud, theft, and violence. And so regulation and authority were as much a part of the shopping experience as haggling or browsing goods. In many cities, officials were assigned to oversee the marketplace. In Athens, for example, agronomoi patrolled the agora, making sure that merchants used honest weights and measures, and that no one cheated the public too blatantly. In Rome, the aediles had similar responsibilities, ensuring that goods were sold fairly, stalls were kept clean, and prices did not spiral out of control. These officials carried both respect and fear, for their presence could mean punishment for dishonest traders or protection for vulnerable buyers. They were the invisible guardians of trust, without whom the market could not function. The question of weights and measures was especially crucial. Every transaction depended on trust that a pound of grain was truly a pound, or that a jar of oil contained what it claimed. Merchants sometimes tampered with their scales, hollowing out weights to make them lighter, or tipping balances to favor themselves. Officials tested these tools, seizing fraudulent ones and punishing those who used them. Markets often displayed standardized measures in public, fixed in stone or bronze, so that buyers could compare and know what was fair. To shop in the market was, therefore, not only to haggle with merchants, but to rely on the watchful eye of authority to prevent outright exploitation. Cleanliness was another concern. The market was crowded with people, animals, and food, and the risk of disease always lurked. Officials required butchers to dispose of waste, bakers to keep their ovens safe, and sellers to avoid letting spoiled goods sit too long in the sun. Violations could bring fines or public shame, for the market's health was tied directly to the community's well-being. Buyers learned to trust merchants not only for their honesty, but also for their ability to maintain cleanliness. For a careless seller could mean sickness at the family table. Taxes and fees also played a role. Many cities required merchants, especially foreigners, to pay for the right to sell in the market. These payments filled civic coffers, funding public works, temples, or even military ventures. For the shopper, this meant that every purchase carried within it a hidden cost, the invisible weight of taxes that sustained the larger machinery of the city. To buy a piece of cloth or a measure of grain was to participate, however indirectly, in the governance of the state. Law and order in the market extended to behavior as well. Theft, fraud, or violence could not be tolerated in a space so central to daily life. Guards patrolled, sometimes soldiers, sometimes hired watchmen, their presence a reminder that peace was not guaranteed, but enforced. Pickpockets still prowled the crowds, but the risk of being caught and punished was real. Fights between buyers and sellers, though common, were often broken up quickly, lest the market dissolve into chaos. For many, the sight of authority figures brought a measure of safety, allowing them to shop with more confidence amid the throng. Religious customs, too, often shaped the rules of the marketplace. Certain days were sacred, when trade might be forbidden, or when particular offerings were expected before business began. Temples near the market sometimes oversaw the sale of sacrificial animals, ensuring that they met proper standards. Priests could declare goods unclean or demand rituals before they were sold. In this way, divine authority mingled with civic regulation, reminding shoppers that their daily bread was tied as much to the gods as to human law. But regulation was not always a burden. For buyers, it provided a sense of security. For honest sellers, it ensured that they could compete fairly against rivals. Merchants who built reputations for honesty flourished under such systems, while cheats risked ruin. The rules created a balance, a framework within which the chaos of trade could function. The noise and energy of the market may have seemed overwhelming, but beneath it all was a hidden order, a scaffolding of law, custom, and oversight that allowed the great machine of commerce to keep turning. For the shopper, these rules were both visible and invisible. You might see the official testing weights, hear a decree shouted by a herald, or watch guards break up a quarrel. But much of the regulation worked silently, shaping the trust that made each purchase possible. To shop in the market was to step into a space where chaos and order coexisted, where human ambition was kept in check by the steady hand of authority. The ancient marketplace, then, was not only a celebration of freedom and exchange, it was also a space of control and structure. The presence of laws and officials ensured that trade could flourish, that the voices of merchants and buyers could rise without collapsing into fraud or violence. To walk through its lanes was to feel this balance, the tension between the noise of human desire and the quiet hand of regulation that kept it all in motion. No matter how vibrant and essential the ancient marketplace was, it was also a place of danger and unpredictability. To shop there required alertness, for beneath the cheerful bargaining and the scent of roasting meat lurked risks that could cost a person their money, their possessions, or even their safety. The market's very liveliness created shadows where trouble flourished, and every visitor, whether rich or poor, had to navigate its hazards with care. The most common danger came from theft. The press of bodies in narrow lanes made it easy for pickpockets to slip unseen hands into purses or cut coin bags from belts. These thieves often worked in groups, one creating a distraction while another struck. A spilled basket of apples or a sudden commotion could cover the theft of a pouch of silver. Foreigners were especially vulnerable, their unfamiliarity with the market and their often heavier purses marking them as easy prey. Shoppers learned to hold their baskets close, to keep one hand on their coin pouch, and to move with the crowd in ways that minimized exposure. But no matter how careful they were, Stories of stolen goods were as much a part of the market as the smell of bread or the sound of music. Fraud was another constant threat. Merchants could be masters of deception, their tricks as old as trade itself. Weights and measures were tampered with, jars of oil filled slightly short, wine watered down, and spices mixed with cheap imitations. Some sellers polished copper to pass it off as bronze, or painted ordinary stones to mimic gems. Buyers tested goods carefully, tasting grain, smelling wine, or feeling cloth to judge its quality. But even the sharpest eye could be fooled, and a careless moment could mean walking home with goods worth far less than the coin spent. Reputation helped guard against fraud. Honest merchants earned loyal customers, but even trust could be exploited, and every shopper carried the fear of being cheated. Disease and filth also haunted the market. With animals penned near food stalls, with meat exposed to the sun and flies, and with thousands of feet churning dust and mud, the conditions were rarely clean. Spoiled goods might still be sold to the desperate or the unsuspecting, spreading illness through households. The sheer press of people made the market a place where sickness could spread quickly, carried on hands that touched bread, coins, and baskets. Officials tried to enforce cleanliness, but rules often clashed with the reality of necessity. Shoppers were aware that their purchases carried risks far greater than fraud, that an infected cut of meat or a contaminated jug of water could mean sickness for an entire family. Violence, too, was never far away. The noise and press of the market could ignite tempers. Arguments over prices, accusations of cheating, or even insults shouted in passing could flare into fights. A spilled drink, a jostled shoulder, a stolen glance at another's goods, all could spark anger. Knives were common tools and could become weapons in moments of rage. Guards patrolled to prevent such outbursts from escalating, but their presence could not stop every quarrel. For some, the thrill of the market was shadowed by the knowledge that violence was always a possibility. Fire was another danger, especially in markets where cooking fires, oil lamps, and straw stalls crowded together. A single spark could leap from an oven or a torch and spread quickly through cloth, wood, and baskets. With so many people pressed together, panic often caused more harm than the flames themselves. Markets that had stood for years could be destroyed in a single day, rebuilt again and again, with the knowledge that fire would always be a lurking threat. There were also subtler dangers. Debts could be forged in the market, promises made in the heat of bargaining that proved ruinous later. A buyer might take goods on credit, unable to repay, sparking disputes that could drag families into hardship. Gambling and drinking were common at the edges of markets, where dice games and cheap wine tempted the unwary into losing hard-earned coin. For some, the market was not only a place of sustenance, but of ruin, where fortunes vanished in a careless afternoon. Even the very crowd carried risks. Stampedes could occur if panic spread, whether from fire, sudden violence, or even rumors of danger. Children were easily lost in the press of bodies, their cries swallowed by the roar of voices. For the elderly or infirm, the crowd could be overwhelming, the constant jostling and noise turning a simple shopping trip into a test of endurance. The market was a place of life, yes, but life lived at its most crowded and intense, where the weak could easily be swept aside. And yet, despite these dangers, people returned again and again. The risks were acknowledged, even expected, but the rewards outweighed them. To eat, to trade, to see, to be seen, these needs drove people into the market regardless of its hazards. Danger was part of its character, inseparable from its vibrancy. To shop, there was to accept risk as part of life itself, just as necessary as the grain in the basket or the oil in the jar. For the ancient shopper, the marketplace was a world of contrasts, laughter and danger, joy and fear, honesty and deceit. To move through it was to balance between opportunity and risk, to keep one's senses sharp while still allowing oneself to marvel at the abundance. The dangers gave the market its edge, its unpredictability, and perhaps even its thrill. Without them, the marketplace would have been dull, safe, and lifeless. With them, it became the stage of life in all its raw and unpredictable forms. The ancient marketplace was not just a place of exchange, it was a place of culture. Within its bustling lanes, music, art, religion, and philosophy mingled with the noise of haggling and the smell of spices. To shop in such a place was to be immersed not only in commerce, but in the living soul of a community, where values, beliefs, and traditions were displayed as vividly as the goods on the stalls. Religion was deeply woven into market life. Temples often stood near, or even within market squares, their columns rising above the stalls, reminding everyone that trade and the divine were inseparable. Priests might walk among the crowd, blessing animals sold for sacrifice, or assuring that offerings were given before certain goods were exchanged. Some markets began with ritual prayers, incense burning at small shrines, to secure prosperity and protect against dishonesty. Shoppers stopped to light candles or scatter grain at the feet of statues, blending the sacred with the mundane. To buy a loaf of bread was not only to feed one's body, but also, in some sense, to participate in a ritual of gratitude and reverence. Festivals transformed the marketplace into a stage of celebration. During harvest festivals, stalls overflowed with flowers, garlands, and sweets. Musicians played louder, dancers filled open spaces, and sellers decorated their goods with ribbons and charms. Animals for sacrifice were paraded through the crowd, their horns gilded or their backs painted with bright colors. These days, shopping became a form of participation in the festival itself, as people purchased treats, ornaments, and gifts to mark the occasion. The marketplace became a place of joy, its atmosphere electric, carrying the spirit of the season into every corner. Philosophy and politics also had their place in the market. In the Greek agora, philosophers like Socrates or Diogenes walked among the stalls, speaking with whoever would listen, questioning the meaning of life even as others bargained over fish or olives. In Rome's Forum, politicians addressed the people, their speeches echoing across the same square where butchers sold meat and bakers sold bread. Ideas as powerful as any empire were exchanged side by side with cabbages and clay jars. To shop in such places was to brush against thought itself, to overhear debates that shaped laws, to absorb fragments of wisdom carried on the air between haggling voices. Art and performance flourished in the marketplace as well. Painters displayed their work on wooden panels, selling portraits or religious icons. Sculptors offered small statues for household altars. Potters decorated their wares with scenes from myth, turning everyday objects into canvases for storytelling. Storytellers and poets recited verses, their words drifting through the crowd, as much a part of the day's shopping as bread or oil. Even the architecture itself, with its colonnades and arches, was a work of art, a declaration of civic pride that made the act of trade feel like a ritual within a gallery of stone. Cultural diversity added another layer. Foreign traders brought not only goods, but songs, dances, and stories from their homelands. Their accents, clothing, and gestures enriched the marketplace with glimpses of distant traditions. Buyers might learn a foreign word while haggling, hear a melody unlike any local tune, or watch a ritual unfamiliar to their own customs. The market became a living museum of cultures, a place where the world's variety was compressed into a single square. The marketplace also carried moral weight. Philosophers and priests alike warned against greed, dishonesty, or excessive luxury, reminding buyers and sellers that commerce was not free from virtue. Some argued that fair trade was a form of justice, that honesty in weights and measures was a sacred duty. Others cautioned against the temptations of imported luxuries, claiming they corrupted the simplicity of life. These moral lessons echoed through the market, shaping the choices of those who listened, though not always curbing the desires of those who longed for spice, silk, or gold. For the ordinary shopper, The culture of the marketplace could be felt in countless small ways. A woman buying cloth might pause to listen to a song that reminded her of a festival long ago. A man haggling over olives might overhear a political debate that stirred his thoughts. A child begging for sweets might be enchanted by a puppet show performed beside a stall. Shopping was never only practical. It was cultural, emotional, even philosophical, carried along by the current of human creativity and belief. In this way, the marketplace was not just a place of survival, but of meaning. It was where the sacred met the ordinary, where ideas brushed against commerce, where art and music gave color to daily life. To shop in such a place was to be reminded that human beings are never satisfied with necessity alone, that we crave beauty, story, ritual, and thought as surely as we crave bread and water. The ancient marketplace offered all of these, binding them together in one vast performance that played out day after day, season after season, at the very center of community life. While the ancient marketplace bustled with trade, culture, and community, it also revealed the sharp divisions of wealth and status that shaped daily life. To walk through its crowded lanes was to witness inequality in its rawest form, where luxury and poverty brushed shoulders, where the clink of gold coins rang beside the desperate cries of beggars. Shopping here was never only about goods, it was about navigating the social landscape that determined who could buy what, and at what cost. For the wealthy, the marketplace was a stage on which to display power and refinement. Nobles, magistrates, and successful merchants, often dressed in fine fabrics, dyed in expensive colors, wearing jewelry that glittered in the sun. They walked with servants carrying baskets, ensuring that their hands remained free to gesture, point, or command. These elite shoppers sought luxury items, rare spices, perfumes, fine silks, and jewelry that declared their wealth to all who saw them. They sometimes paid without haggling, as if to show that their status placed them above the common rituals of bargaining. For them, the marketplace was less about necessity and more about spectacle, a place where purchases reinforced identity and proclaimed superiority. For the middle ranks, artisans, craftsmen, modest farmers, the market was a more practical endeavor. They shopped for daily food, tools, and household goods, bargaining carefully, stretching each coin to provide for their families. Yet even within this group, there were aspirations. A craftsman might save to buy a bolt of fine cloth for his wife, or a farmer's family might splurge on a small amount of imported spice for a festival meal. These purchases were not luxuries in the grand sense, but they were statements of pride, gestures that showed they too could reach for something beyond survival. In their careful choices lay the quiet dignity of striving, of refusing to let poverty strip life of all beauty. At the bottom of the hierarchy were the poor, whose presence in the market was marked by struggle. Some came with only a handful of coins, seeking the cheapest bread or the last scraps of vegetables before nightfall. Others hovered at the edges, unable to buy, but hoping for kindness or leftover goods discarded at the end of the day. Their clothes were patched, their baskets often empty, their voices more likely to plead for alms than to bargain. For these people, the market was both a place of humiliation and of hope, where survival depended on the generosity of others, or the luck of finding what no one else wanted. Slavery, too, was part of the market's harsh reality. Slaves shopped on behalf of their masters, carrying heavy loads, their presence a silent reminder of their lack of freedom. In some markets, slaves themselves were bought and sold, their bodies treated as commodities beside animals and tools. Buyers inspected them for strength, youth, or skill, while sellers shouted their virtues like they would any other good. For those enslaved, the market was not a place of community, but of vulnerability, where human dignity was stripped away in the name of trade. This layering of wealth and poverty created a market that was both unified and divided. Everyone shared the same space, brushed against the same crowds, breathed the same air thick with spice and sweat. Yet the differences between them were unmistakable. A noblewoman choosing silk under the shade of a colonnade did not live in the same world as a poor mother haggling for scraps of bread. Their paths crossed, but their realities remained worlds apart. The marketplace was both the most democratic and the most unequal of spaces, a place where everyone gathered, but not everyone belonged equally. These divisions were often visible in the very goods on display. Expensive fabrics and jewelry gleamed beside simple clay pots. Rare spices were measured out in pinches, while piles of onions were sold by the basket. A rich man could buy an amphora of fine wine, while a poor laborer might scrape together coins for a single cup. The contrast was stark, and every shopper was reminded, in what they could or could not afford, of their place in society. Yet even in this inequality, there were moments of shared humanity. The rich and the poor alike listened to storytellers, laughed at jugglers, or paused to watch musicians. A noble might haggle for bread with the same fervor as a farmer's wife, their voices rising in similar tones. The marketplace, in its crowded chaos, blurred boundaries as much as it reinforced them. It was the one place where all levels of society were visible to one another, where the struggles of the poor stood in the same light as the luxuries of the rich. For the shopper, navigating this landscape meant more than counting coins. It meant understanding one's place, performing identity through purchases, and sometimes hiding desire behind necessity. Every coin spent, every item chosen, was a small act of social expression, declaring wealth, modesty, or desperation. The market was not only an economic engine, but a mirror of society's inequalities, reflecting both its divisions and its shared dependence on trade. To shop in the ancient marketplace was to step into this complex web of status and survival, where every purchase echoed with more than practical meaning. It was a reminder that goods carry weight, not only in their use, but in what they say about those who own them. The market revealed, in plain sight, the invisible lines that divided society, and in doing so, it made those lines both unavoidable and undeniable. As the day in the ancient marketplace drew to a close, the energy that had once surged through its lanes slowly shifted. The bright chaos of morning and the noisy rush of midday gave way to a different rhythm, one marked by weariness, bargains, and the final push to sell or buy before the stalls closed. To shop in the late hours of the market was to experience a world that felt both familiar and transformed, where urgency lingered in the air and every deal carried a sense of finality. By late afternoon, the crowd had thinned somewhat, though not disappeared. The wealthier buyers had long since departed, their baskets filled, their servants trailing behind them with jars of oil, bundles of cloth, or amphorae of wine. What remained were the patient, the poor, and the clever, those who knew that the best bargains could be struck when the sun hung low, and merchants grew anxious to return home lighter than they had arrived. Housewives lingered, waiting for bakers to sell bread at reduced prices or for butchers to cut deals on meat that would spoil by nightfall. Children clutched a few small coins, eager for sweets that sellers offered cheaply rather than carry home. For these shoppers, the late hours of the market were not only about saving money, but about survival, stretching each coin as far as it would go. Merchants, their voices hoarse from a day of calling out, still pressed their goods with urgency. Last chance, they cried, lowering prices with each passing moment. Farmers sold sacks of grain at discounts, unwilling to haul them back over country roads. Fishmongers nearly gave away their remaining catch, knowing that no one would buy it once the smell of rot set in. Sellers of fruit dropped their prices by half, their hands sticky from juices that had leaked through baskets. This was the hour when haggling shifted from performance to necessity, when the game was no longer about pride, but about practicality. Both sides knew the truth. Whatever was not sold now would lose its value by morning. The atmosphere itself changed. The sun's glare softened into golden light, casting long shadows across the stalls. Dust settled in the cooling air, and the smell of the market grew heavier, riper fruit, stale bread, fish beginning to turn, and the faint smoke of fires being lit for the evening meal. Voices, once a roar, softened to a hum. The clamor of haggling turned into the murmur of final bargains, punctuated by laughter from those who knew they had won a deal. Musicians played slower tunes, their instruments worn from a long day, while storytellers told their last tales to dwindling crowds. The market seemed to exhale, its frenetic energy easing into a tired calm. At this hour, generosity sometimes appeared. Merchants, weary and softened by the prospect of packing up, gave away small scraps to the poor half, a loaf of bread, a handful of wilted herbs, a bruised piece of fruit. Beggars lingered more boldly now, their chances better when sellers wanted only to empty their baskets. Children ran to catch these gifts, their laughter mingling with the sighs of tired sellers. In these small exchanges, the marketplace revealed a quieter side of itself, one shaped less by profit and more by the shared humanity that emerged at day's end. You have now walked through the ancient marketplace, not as a hurried tourist or distant observer, but as someone who has felt its pulse and breathed its air. You have seen the merchants spread their wares in the cool of morning, heard their voices rise in haggling song, and watched the market swell to life before settling into its weary dusk. You have smelled the spices that traveled across deserts, touched the fabrics dyed in brilliant colors, and tasted the sweetness of fruit or the sharpness of wine. You have felt the press of crowds, the thrill of bargains, the danger of theft, and the warmth of community. Shopping in the ancient marketplace was never only about goods. It was about survival, identity, and belonging. These markets were more than economic engines. They were the heartbeat of cities, where rich and poor, local and foreign, free and enslaved all crossed paths. They were schools where children learned the art of bargaining, theaters where storytellers and musicians enchanted crowds, temples where commerce and the sacred intertwined. They were reflections of society itself, its inequalities, its creativity, its hunger, its joy. To shop in such a place was to immerse oneself in the fullness of human life, with all its noise, its risk, its wonder, and its endless variety. Though centuries have passed, echoes of those markets remain. The lively chatter of a crowded bazaar, the scent of bread from a street stall, the sparkle of jewelry under the sun, these are not so different from what you might experience even today in markets around the world. To imagine yourself among them is to feel a connection across time, to realize that the act of gathering, trading, and sharing in a public space is as ancient as civilization itself. Before you drift away into rest, I want to thank you for joining me on this journey into the ancient marketplace. If you enjoyed this story and would like to hear more, please take a moment to subscribe to History for Sleep. Subscribing helps you stay connected with new episodes and supports the work of bringing these soothing journeys from the past into your present. I'd also love to hear from you. Leave a comment telling us what parts of history interest you most, or simply share when you listen in. Do you play these stories as you settle into bed, during a nap, or when you just need a moment of calm in your day? Your words help guide the stories we tell next and connect you with others who share this love of history and peace. Now, let your eyes grow heavy as you picture the market square fading into twilight, the last merchants packing away their stalls, the crowd dispersing, and the air falling silent after a day of noise and color. Imagine yourself walking away slowly, your basket full, your heart steady, your body at ease. The market closes, and with it, so does this story, leaving you to rest in the quiet rhythm of sleep.